Now, having given you some basic ideas about Buddhist research and also method and methodology, let me spend some time with you on brief history of what we mean Buddhist studies. Particularly what I mean by this is the what we call today the academic study of Buddhism. So, the study of the teaching of the Buddha for the purpose of attaining nirvana. This was basically the case during the time of the Buddha. The study was only for a purpose, not for study's sake. Now, when we think about the Buddhist studies, it's very important for us to understand the nature of the Buddha's teaching first. Now, from the very beginning, we know that the study of the Dhamma was required. Now, you can contrast this with, for example, God-centered religion, where the main virtue is the faith. You trust and you have faith in God, and then you get salvation. However, Buddhism as a philosophy is different, because Buddhism requires for you to have knowledge. The liberation in Buddhism ultimately comes through knowledge. Now, this is very important. During the time of the Buddha described his teaching in Sangarava Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya with the words Sayang Abhinya Satchikatva. Sayang Abhinya Satchikatva. That means one has to, by one's own, realize the teaching by oneself. Sayang, by oneself. Abhinya, through super knowledge. Satchikatva, realize. So the realization by oneself through super knowledge means knowledge is playing a very important role in Buddhism. So therefore, studying the Dhamma was there from the very beginning. Okay? Studying the Dhamma was there from the very beginning. However, important thing is, during the time of the Buddha, Dhamma was studied only for the sake of attaining final goal. You don't study the Dhamma for the sake of study. Simply because you want to study Dhamma, you don't study Dhamma. Dhamma was, the main purpose of the study of the Dhamma was to attain nirvana as a part of your, as the aspect of your path, or to support your path. In the, you remember in the Alagadupama Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya, Buddha refers to some disciples of him who learned the Navanga Sattu Sasana just to debate with others, just to attack others. Attukkansana and Paravambana, to elevate oneself and also to disparage others. And Buddha says that studying Dhamma in that manner is not good. So what I am trying to tell you is, during the time of the Buddha, Dhamma was studied. Dhamma study was very important, but Dhamma study was only as a means to an end. Okay? You study Dhamma as a means to an end. So the means means you are studying Dhamma only as a instrument or means to attain the final liberation. In other words, we can say that study of Dhamma is not an end in itself, but a means. Okay. So, So this limit we have to understand very carefully. The study of the Dhamma is not an end in itself. It is only a means to attain nirvana. So Dhamma was studied only as a means. Now there are a lot of examples. I give you in here. In Dhammapada we have Bahumpi che sahitang bhasamano natakkaro hoti naro pamatto. You all know it, right? And then in the Dhammapada you also have Appampi che sahitang bhasamano dhammasa hoti anudhammachari. You are familiar with that, right? Okay. So Bahumpi che sahitang bhasamano, even one were to study the sahitang, literature, Dhamma, in great deal, if he doesn't practice, then it is of no use. And then appampiche sahitam bhasamano, even if you study little, if you practice it, that is much better. So you can see that the study was not the main thing. Dhamma study was not the main thing. Main thing was to practice. Sunata, dhareta and charatha. Charatha means you practice it. You sunata, you study it, learn it, you listen to it. Dhareta, you memorize it. And then finally, charata dhamme, you practice it. So the basic idea was, the practice and not really the learning very much. So again, you can see that silena anupetas sutena attona vijjati. That comes in the Jataka. Silena anupetas sutena attona vijjati. If a person doesn't have sila, his sutta means learnedness, is of no use. So you can see this is the basic Buddhist position about studying the Dhamma. So Dhamma study is essential, but only in so far as it helps you to attain nirvana. Okay? Now, in this stage of Buddhist study, we can say that you are not really doing academic study. Now, academic study of Buddhism is very different from this, okay? So, at the very beginning stage, you can see that Dhamma was studied by people in order to attain. And then learnedness was very important, but it was always given a secondary place. There were some arahants who were not learned. Some arahants coming from very ordinary families, both men and women, they were not educated people. But of course, not educated does not mean that they don't have sharp mind or brain, but simply they are not traditionally educated. That is what it means. So therefore, in the early Buddhist tradition, during the time of the Buddha, we see that study was only as a means, not as an end in itself. Then we move into the first Sangayana, after the parinirvana of the Buddha, as the beginning of the learning of Dhamma for the preservation of it for the sake of posterity. This is not directly connected to one's realization. The study of the Dhamma for its preservation marks the beginning of what is known today as academic study of Buddhism. Now, this is, as I see, today what we call academic study of Buddhism. I think this is how it began. Now, today when we say academic study of Buddhism, we know that Buddhism is studied not only in Buddhist countries or Buddhist colleges. Buddhism is studied by many people all over the world and in many universities which are not Buddhist. And the lecturers and professors who teach Buddhism are also not Buddhist. Right? This is something very interesting. This kind of thing did not happen in the ancient world. In the ancient world, you study only your religion. You don't study other people's religions. If at all you study other people's religion, you study because in order to find that it is wrong. So usually people are not encouraged to study other people's religion because you believe that your religion, your dharma is the correct dharma. So why do you have to study the wrong dharma? So therefore, in the ancient times, people didn't study other people's religion. But today, what we call academic study of Buddhism means Buddhist studies are done by people all over the world, not necessarily that they are Buddhist. Some of them do not have any religion. Some of them are Christian or any other religion. They do study of Buddhism as an academic study. When you say academic study of Buddhism, it does not have a religious purpose. Now, when the Buddha taught the Dhamma, he taught the Dhamma in order for people to attain Nirvana. Now, attaining Nirvana is the religious purpose, religious goal in our life, right? It is the goal in our life. That is a religious goal. But today, when we do Buddhist studies, we usually, in many parts of the world, they do Buddhist studies, they do Buddhist research in order to get a degree. So you get MA, MPhil or PhD, and then you get a job to teach Buddhist studies. So it is like any other subject. It has nothing much to do with the practice. So academic study of Buddhism, what I mean by this is basically this type of study of Buddhism by Buddhist or non-Buddhist without much religious purpose. Okay? I mean, you do not have a religious purpose. You are not looking at religiously. You are looking at it as a academic exercise. Now, how did this begin? According to my understanding, in the Buddhist tradition, this happened when the Buddha's parinirvana. Now, with the Buddha's parinirvana, when the Buddha is no more, there was a very serious situation. In the absence of the Buddha, who is going to answer the questions the disciples will have? The Buddha is no more. According to Mahaparinibbana Sutta of the Digha Nikaya, Venerable Ananda asked from the Buddha. Actually, he asked many questions. What to do and what not to do. And Buddha says to Venerable Ananda, when he is no more, when he attains parinirvana, the teacher will be the Dhamma he taught and the Vinaya he prescribed. So this is basically, so Buddha did not appoint a person, any other monk, as the next Buddha or as the head of the Sangha. Now, historically this is something very important. So who is the teacher? Now when the Buddha is there, we say Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, and then you go to the Buddha. Whenever you have a question, you go to the Buddha and ask the question. Whenever there is a problem about Vinaya, you go to the Buddha and ask question and get clarifications. But when the Buddha attained parinirvana, there is no Buddha. And Buddha said that Dhamma and the Vinaya will be the master. Yoko maya dhammo desito vinayo paññatto sovo mamaccena satta. So these are the words of the Buddha. So this is what the Buddha said. Yoko dhammo desito vinayo paññatto sovo mamaccena satta. The Dhamma taught by me and the Vinaya prescribed by me will be your teacher once I am not there. Now, important question is, where is the Dhamma and the Vinaya when the Buddha attained parinirvana? Was it in the books? No. Dhamma and the Vinaya was in some disciples' mind, in the memory. Right? Dhamma was in the memory. Now we know that Venerable Ananda remembered, he is the greatest of all people who memorized the Dhamma, Bahusutta. So Venerable Ananda remembered almost, everything taught by the Buddha. But however, Venerable Ananda remembered things only after he became the attendant to the Buddha. But what about the things Buddha taught before? So in other words, it means that Dhamma was memorized mainly by Venerable Ananda and also by some other disciples. Okay? And then Vinaya was memorized by Venerable Upali. So we have two chief disciples, Venerable Ananda and Venerable Upali, who remember the Dhamma. Now, when the Buddha says that when I attain Parinirvana, Dhamma I taught and the Vinaya I prescribe will be your teacher means your teacher is in someone's memory. So you can see that the first Sangayana was convened mainly because Dhamma and the Vinaya had to be organized so that it is available for everybody to consult. Now this is very important. In the traditional stories of the first Sangayana, we are told that this the monk who entered the sasana when he was old, Subhadda said some nasty words about the Buddha. So Venerable Mahakashyapa had to convene the first Sangayana because of these bad words of Subhadda. But I think maybe Subhadda said bad words. But I consider the most important reason for the convening of the first Sangayana is not Subhadda's words, but this requirement. Because when the Buddha is no more, Dhamma had to be there, Vinaya had to be there. Agreed upon Dhamma and agreed upon Vinaya. Everybody had to be in agreement about it. This is something very important. Now, you can see that for the first time, after the parinirvana of the Buddha, in the first Sangayana, we see that Dhamma was assigned to different disciples to memorize. Vinaya was assigned to Venerable Upali and his pupils to memorize. So, these traditions finally became the main traditions of Bhanaka. In Sri Lankan Pali commentaries, you get this word Bhanaka. Bhanaka means the Bhasati, Bhanaka. So this Bhanaka tradition started with this. Bhanaka, it comes from Bhasati. Bhas is the root. So the Bhanaka tradition started with the first Sangayana because Digha Nikaya was assigned, Majjhima, Sanyutta, Anguttara was assigned to different disciples, Venerable Mahakasapa, Anuruddha, Sariputta's disciples and so on. And Vinaya was assigned to Venerable Mahakashyapa. Now here you can see some very important difference. Now before the parinirvana of the Buddha, monks and nuns studied the Dhamma in order for them to attain nirvana. However, after the parinirvana of the Buddha, with the first Sangayana, what you see is monks, particularly monks, had to learn the Dhamma and learn the Vinaya, not only to attain nirvana, but also to memorize it for the posterity. That means for the people who come to the sasana subsequently. Now, if the Buddha appointed the head, of course, people can go to that head and, ask questions. But Buddha never appointed the head. What do you think about it? Why Buddha did not appoint a head or successor to himself? So after the parinirvana of the Buddha, it is Dhamma and the Vinaya, not a person. There is quite a lot of academic discussion about this. Scholars debate. But I think basically, Buddha cannot appoint another Buddha, right? Can a Buddha be appointed? Buddha cannot be appointed because Buddha has to perfect paramitas and, Buddha has to become a Buddha. Simply the one Buddha cannot name, okay, you are the Buddha or something. So it's pretty simple. You can see that Buddha cannot appoint a Buddha. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean that the Sangha, Sasana did not have a leader. Of course, right after the Parinirvana of the Buddha, Venerable Mahakashyapa became the leader. But although Venerable Mahakashyapa became the Sangha leader, that does not mean that Venerable Mahakashyapa became the Buddha. Okay? Because you can't appoint a Buddha. Now, we respect the Buddha today because of his teaching. Right? Some people, some Western people, some scholars even doubt whether there is a person called Buddha lived. Some people doubt. But what nobody can doubt is that there is Dhamma and the Vinaya. Dhamma and the Vinaya is there. Nobody can doubt that, right? Dhamma and the Vinaya. So Dhamma and the Vinaya must have been taught by one person. Now that person is the Buddha. So whether historical Buddha whether he was there or not, people can debate. But we cannot deny the fact that somebody taught this Dhamma. Somebody prescribed the Vinaya. So that somebody, that person is the Buddha. So we cannot really doubt that. So the Dhamma and the Vinaya is there. Dhamma and the Vinaya is the most important thing. Even among Dhamma and the Vinaya, Dhamma is the most important because Vinaya comes from the Dhamma. You know that in the Buddha Sasana, Vinaya was not there at the beginning. Dhamma was the beginning. Buddha prescribed Vinaya rules after some time. But before that, there was only Dhamma. But in the Dhamma, we had Tisso Sikha, Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Now, Sila was there, Samadhi was there, Panya was there, but not the Vinaya rules. So there is a difference between Sila and the Vinaya rule. Sila was there from the very beginning, but Vinaya rules came later. Okay? So Vinaya rules are based on the Dhamma. So therefore, Dhamma is the main thing. In the Anguttara Nikaya, there is a reference to the effect that at one time Buddha thought who is going to be his teacher. And then Buddha did not find anyone to be his teacher. Then this particular sutta says that Buddha placed his own teaching in the place of his teacher. So in other words, Dhamma is even the teacher of the Buddha. So Dhamma is the most important thing, and Vinaya derives. Vinaya comes from the Dhamma. Okay, now we can discuss that separately. So Dhamma and the Vinaya had to be there as the successor to the Buddha. Buddha did not appoint a person. So this is why the first Sanghayana had to be there. Now in the first Sanghayana, the 500 Arahants decided what are the discourses, what the Dhamma is, decided what the Vinaya is. And then Sanghayana means they chanted it together. Sanghayana. Gayana means chanting. Sang means together. So Sanghayana means chanting together, reciting together. What is the significance of reciting together? You decide, okay, these are the long discourses, these are the middle discourses, these are the connected, these are the gradual discourses. So, they were arranged, and then all those monks sat down and chanted it together. In fact, chanting together has a great significance. Your chanting together means you agree to what is chanted. Now you do Uposatha. Now in the Uposatha, one aspect is to recite the Vinaya rules, Patimokka rules. By reciting the Patimokka rules, the very act signifies that you agree to those things. So reciting together is a symbolic act. You sit down and reciting together means you accept it as the word of the Buddha. So, first Sanghayana is important because that was the first time that the monks decided, okay, this is the word of the Buddha. Buddha Vachana. Now when we say Buddha Vachana doesn't mean that all the words that came from the mouth of the Buddha. Even the Venerable Sariputta's sermons are considered to be Buddha Vachana. Venerable Mahakachanand's sermons are considered to be Buddha Vachana. Dhammadinna Theri's discourse is also considered to be Buddha Vachana. Now this concept of Buddha Vachana is not exactly the words coming from the mouth of the Buddha, The Buddha Vachana means the words according to the teaching of the Buddha. So even Sravaka Bhashita, Sravika Bhashita, all these things became the word of the Buddha. So the first Sangayana is very important to understand how the Tripitaka we are speaking today has been formulated. Not everything was finalized, but they started formulating the Tripitaka in that event. And then what they formulated, they chanted together. Chanting together means they agree to follow it. And the most important thing is, having chanted it, each part was assigned to different monastic groups. Vinaya was assigned to Venerable Upali and his pupils, and the Diga, Majjhima, Sanyutta, Anguttara were assigned to the disciples of the great Theras, Venerable Mahakassapa, Anuruddha, Ananda and Sariputta, Sariputta Thera's disciples. And now here you can see something very interesting. Namely, those monks had to memorize, those who undertake to memorize Vinaya, they had to memorize Vinaya because they are the experts in the Vinaya. If a problem arises about Vinaya, then people come to them, get clarification. If a problem arises about the Dhamma, either people will go to Diga experts, Majjhima experts, Sanyutta experts, or Anguttara experts. So, this is how this Bhanaka tradition started. Subsequently in Sri Lanka, we had various Diga Bhanaka, Majjhima Bhanaka, and so on. Bhanakas. Bhanaka means experts in, particular thing. But Bhanaka basically means, one who recites the doctrine. So I think the first Sangayana is very important. Now, first Sangayana marks the study of Buddhism other than attaining Nirvana. Now, up to that point, monks had to study the Dhamma in order to attain Nirvana. However, after the Parinirvana of the Buddha, we can see that monks had to study the word of the Buddha, not only to attain Nirvana, but also to keep that text in the memory. In the ancient days, there was no way to write the books. So the learnedness was what is called Bahusutta. Bahusutta means one who has heard a lot. So the Bahusuttas were the people who heard a lot and kept in their memory what they have heard. So you can see that I would consider this as the beginning of the Buddhist studies. So in other words, the first Sangayana as the beginning of Buddhist studies, what we are talking about today. Okay, basically this is how it began, and subsequently in the history of Buddhism, how Dhamma and Vinaya were distributed among the great Theras for preservation. In the subsequent Buddhist history, such categories as Ganta Dura, Vipassana Dura evolved as a result of this requirement. So in the subsequent history, we see particularly two types of monks, Ganta Dura and Vipassana Dura. Now Ganta Dura, Ganta means books. Ganta Dura means the yoke. Dura Pali means yoke. Yoke is that, the wooden bar that is placed on the neck of the bull who is carrying the cart. So, not a very good metaphor actually, because, it is a burden. Now you can see that Dura is a kind of burden, but this burden had to be carried not only for yourself, but for the sake of others. So it is a Ganta Dura, the burden of the books. But the books were not there. Today we call Ganta the books, but Ganta means something that is woven together, combined, so which means something kept memorized, kept in the memory, and that was considered to be the Ganta Dura, and then subsequently we had Vipassana Dura. Now, in the Buddhist tradition, things change quite a lot. I'm not going to talk about those things in detail today, but gradually, Ganta Dura people became more important than Vipassana Dura people, and there is quite a lot of happening, so I'm not going to those details. But the beginning of Gantha Dura, Vipassana Dura, that existed in the Buddhist countries like Sri Lanka, Myanmar and other countries among the Buddhist monks. Some became learned monks, some became meditators, some became both. Now that tradition starts from the first Sangayana. So I would consider the first Sangayana to be the beginning of the academic, what we call the academic study of Buddhism. In the ancient Buddhist world, the academic study of Buddhism was called Gantha Dura, and the yoke of the books. Now, with the evolution of the Sangha, it is interesting that it was understood that you have to study the Dhamma under a teacher. And in the Sri Lankan tradition, we have this division of Dhammakatika and Pansukulika. Dhammakatikas are the people who are the preachers of the Dhamma. Pansukulika are the people, meditators who wear rag robes, Pansukula. So these two divisions is there. Dhammakatika and Pansukulika. Now, Dhammakatikas are the learned people. Pansukulikas were basically meditators. Those who preach Dhamma. In order to preach Dhamma, you have to be. So, in the Buddhist tradition, we can see that Dhammakatika, Pansukulika, Gantadura, Vipassanadura. So, these divisions arose among the monks. So, gradually we can see that there was a group of people who are learned. And there was a group of people who are meditators. And sometimes, in the history we can see that learned people were not always morally good. And then meditating people were not always learned. They did not know the Dhamma very well. So, there was always some kind of, not really a conflict, but, difference of status between these two groups. In Sri Lanka, we have this story during the King Vattagamini Abhaya's time, for the first time in the Theravada history, word of the Buddha was written down in the palm leaves. This was necessitated because there was a great famine, so many monks died, and there was no one to take care of the Dhamma, and large group of monks went into India to save their life, and a small group of monks remained in Sri Lanka. And then when the famine is over, after a long time, monks got together, and then they tested their memories. Memories were okay. But they realized that it was a risky thing to keep the Dhamma in the memory. If somebody who kept it in the memory died, entire book, that memory would have died. And then there was also another incident. Mahanidesa was remembered by only one monk. But that monk's reputation for Sila was not very good. Okay? So the other monks did not want to go to him and learn from him. Because, when someone has, something in your memory, you have to pay respect to him and, get it out of his memory. Not like today. Today we can just borrow the book and read it. But if the book is in your memory, then you have to pay respect to that person and please him and get it out of him. But the other monks did not want to go him and pay respect to him and get it learned. But there was nothing they could do. So they had to go to that person whose sila was problematic in order to learn Mahanidesa. So you can see that Dhamma was at a risk. Because memory, so many people who had memories died. So therefore in Sri Lanka it was committed into writing. Now this is basically, you can see that how, the learnedness became very important. And at this event, there was a very important and interesting debate. The debate was, what is the root of the sasana? Whether it is pariyatti or patipatti. Pariyatti is, learnedness. Learning the Tripitaka, learning the word of the Buddha is pariyatti. Patipatti is the practice. Now, some people said that pariyatti is the root or the main thing. And some others said that no, patipatti. Pansakulika said that patipatti is the most important thing. Patipatti is the root of the sasana. Dhammakatika said that no, pariyatti. Pariyatti means paryapti or the learnedness is the root of the sasana. Now there was a debate. In this debate, who won? Dhammakatikas won because they are the learned people. They have more points. Pansakulikas were not very learned, so they lost in the debate. So the Dhammakatikas became more important. Dhammakatikas won the debate. The conclusion is that if you don't have Dhamma, how can you practice it? So in order to practice, you have to have the Dhamma. So in order to practice, you have to know the Dhamma. So therefore, Dhammakatikas won the debate. But that's really a problematic thing because Sila went down and learnedness came up. Sila was not very important, but learnedness became more important. But anyhow, there is quite a lot we can talk about this thing. I am not going to go into the history, but you can see how certain things change because of that. So now to summarize, at the very beginning, during the time of the Buddha, the study of the Dhamma was in order to attain nirvana. The study of the Dhamma was in order to support the practice. However, after the parinirvana of the Buddha, with the first Sanghayana, the Dhamma, word of the Buddha had to be preserved. In order to preserve the word of the Buddha, it had to be memorized so that it can be given to the posterity. Actually, it is because of the monks who memorized that Dhamma, we have the Dhamma today. So it is a great thing. Dhamma was memorized, and then memorized, this Dhamma was transmitted to Buddhist countries, to Sri Lanka, and in Sri Lanka it was written down. So, this is the whole story. And the Tripitaka again was got from Anvarata, King Anvarata in this country from Sri Lanka. And so it came to Southeast Asia, so it became established in the Theravada world. So learnedness is very important. It started with the first Sanghayana. So today, when we are discussing Buddhist academic study, I think the first Sanghayana marks the beginning of Buddhist studies in the world. Okay, let me wind up from this point here, and I will let you ask any questions if you have any questions. And tomorrow I'm going to discuss the Katha Vattu with you, all 2 hours or 2.5 hours. And then coming week, I will be discussing Nagarjuna. Again, we will go in this same way repeatedly. Is that okay? So I will do it that way. And now if you have any questions about what I said so far, please. If you don't want to ask, you can even write it in a piece of paper and send it to me.
Just now you explained Priyati. So in my country, the monk and nuns study learning Buddhist language. And Sri Lanka country, most nuns, they are studying learning Buddhist language. The two countries, the monk and nuns, how to different study and learning?
Okay, that's an important question. In fact, when we look at the two countries, Burma and Sri Lanka, the Buddhist studies tradition in both countries there are some similarities and also some differences. Monastic education education by monks and also by nuns basically is based on Pali language and also memorization of the Dhamma texts and understanding. And in Sri Lanka, we have this education system where what is called Pirivena or Parivena, where the young novices study for 2 years the very basic things that are needed for a monk. So they memorize things and they learn Pali, and then they move into the next level. They learn Pali more and also Sanskrit, but then they also learn many other things like English and history and other things. And then finally the conclusion of that process in Sri Lanka is either the Buddhist monks can go into the state universities or they can go into there are 2 monastic Buddhist universities in the country. They can go to either of those universities, or some of the people don't go to universities at all. Now, I think the difference between the 2 countries is in Myanmar, in your country, the pariyatti or the learning of the Pali language and Buddha Vachana is much more extensive. Like when you say Dhammacharya, you learn so much. Now in Sri Lanka, we don't have a similar examination. Sometimes in the Sri Lankan system, a monk who is, a young boy who is coming to the sasana, can directly study for the government examinations and go to university and may not know anything about the Dhamma very much, not know about the Pali. So in that sense, Buddhist monastic education in this country is much, I would say, stronger, okay, and also more traditional. Like, the memorizing is an important part. Now in Sri Lanka, this memorizing part is also gradually going down. There are some examinations like Dhammacharya, but of course those are not very popular. Only very few monks and nuns study for those things. And also there is an examination called Prachina Pandita. Now Prachina Pandita has 3 levels. And all these 3 levels you have to study Pali, Sinhala and Sanskrit. So 3 languages. So when you pass all 3 levels, you are an expert in, but not only in Pali, but Pali, Sanskrit and Sinhala. So this is basically the Buddhist education in Sri Lanka. But if you go directly to university, sometimes in the university some Buddhist monks study economics or geography or sociology. They may not have deep knowledge in Buddhism unless they study on their own. So there is a difference between the 2 traditions. So here the pariyatti is more focused on learning the Tripitaka. So you have Dhamma, Vinaya and Abhidhamma. And in fact, I got my learning in a more traditional manner. So I have learned quite a lot, learned by heart. I remember when I was very small, I came to association with one Burmese monk who was living in Sri Lanka. He taught me how to read Burmese, so I can read Burmese in Pali. And so I memorized a lot. But now modern generation is not memorizing much. So these are some of the differences.
Yes. May I ask us 2 questions?
Yeah, sure.
And one of the questions is, I wanted to know about the MP standards and PhD standards. Mm-hmm. And then second thing is, you have a freedom about the introductions research. As much as I know, it's, in the research you are lecturer, and you give a full line to take research, giving you the interpretation to some old concept, something like that. I wanted to ask, as a one candidate or student, he wanted to translate some Pali textbook. If so, it can be called like a research.
New knowledge, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Venerable. Let me answer your second question first. Now, suppose you are editing and translating, actually about translating textual, sit down. I will be talking to you next term because it is my next topic, textual studies. A textual study qualifies to be new knowledge if you study a text first that has not been studied before. Even if it has been studied before, if you can make new improvements. For example, when the PTS, Pali Text Society, started studying Pali text, they started at the end of 19th century. And the Rhys Davids, who started the PTS, Pali Text Society, was a British civil servant in Sri Lanka who learned Pali in Sri Lanka and went back and he established the PTS, Pali Text Society. But Reverend, those people did not know very much Pali. Whatever with the limited knowledge, they started editing the Pali text. So, even though PTS texts have been edited and published, there are lots of problems in PTS text. Now the PTS itself is re-editing those things. Now first those texts were edited, now they are being re-edited. So re-edition, you change certain terms, you introduce certain, textual edition. So that's the new knowledge. So that doesn't mean that even if somebody has edited the book, when you read it, if you feel that that edition is not good, you can edit it again. But then you have to give reasons why you change. I remember I had one student, graduate student, who did this PhD. He was a monk from Vietnam, and he studied the translation of Miss I.B. Horner, who translated Vinay Pitaka into English. And this monk, for his PhD, studied those translations and pointed out so many places where he think I.B. Horner was wrong. But of course we have to study those things again and see whether I.B. Horner is wrong. But that's a new knowledge. So you can edit a text, and if you can edit in a new manner, it comes to be So anyhow, in my next lecture on research methodology, I'm going to talk about textual research. So we'll be discussing more on that next time, okay? And on your second question, MPhil and PhD, actually the difference between MPhil and PhD is basically only the size. Only the size. Now in many universities, they don't encourage people to do MPhils. Because, an MPhil can take 3 years or 4 years, and then again you do a PhD for another 3-4 years, long time. Because only difference is, for example, very rough difference is for MPhil, you are supposed to write 40,000 words. For PhD, you are supposed to write 70 or 75,000 words. So the difference between the two is actually the length. Not much of it. Research is research for both. But sometimes, the universities give MPhil for PhD dissertation. If it is not good enough for PhD, then they will give it MPhil. But if you do a MPhil research and then again a PhD research, it's almost duplicating. So, taking a lot of time. So nowadays, a lot of universities do not encourage MPhil. Like you do MA, and then you register for MPhil, you study for 1 year, and then your research is upgraded to a PhD. So you don't get MPhil, but you get PhD. So this is basically a practical thing. So not difference really. But of course, if you have only MPhil and not PhD, then you are not a PhD. Because MPhil is quantity-wise different. So the difference is MPhil and PhD is basically quantity, not the quality. right, quantity. The limit, word limit is much less, but the quality has to be the same. Okay.
I ask one question concerning what your talk is. What is new knowledge in Buddhist study? I want to know. You said giving a new interpretation and to some old concept. I want to know exactly what is a new interpretation and what is old concept in our Buddhist Pali literature, according to your experiences.
Okay, thank you. In fact, thank you. I gave example. I think just to repeat the example again. You remember my example about the concept of Sangha. Now, Sangha is basically understood as representing Bhikkhu Sangha. Now, we can say this is the old concept. Now, another person came up and he interpreted the concept of Sangha as not only referring to the Bhikkhu Sangha, he said Bhikkhuni Sangha and also Upasaka and Upasika Sangha. Now, that's a new interpretation. Because when you say that Sangha also includes Upasaka and Upasika, that's very different from our traditional understanding. Usually for the Sangha, we pay homage, we give dana and all these things. But what about this? The Upasaka and Upasika also is Sangha. Then what? Should we give dana? There are a lot of other questions. So this new interpretation is challenging. New interpretation is problematic. But, it's a new interpretation. So if the person can really establish that in the Buddha's teaching, Sangha means all four, then, that's a new interpretation to your old concept. So, in the ancient traditional manner, we understand the concept in some manner, and then you can come up with a different interpretation. Now, for example, commentaries give us the traditional interpretation. Say, my second example was the Venerable Jnanavira's interpretation of Paticcasamuppada. He usually Paticcasamuppada we understand according to Buddha Ghosha. According to Buddha Ghosha, Atite hetavo pancha, idani phala panchakam, idani hetavo pancha, I think phala panchakam. So, Atita hetu, idani phala, present, idani hetavo, I think phala, future phala. But then Venerable Jnanavira said that, no, it does not involve three bhavas, it involves only the present bhava. So you have to understand Paticcasamuppada as involving only this life. Now that's a new interpretation. So, but it doesn't mean that you have to accept the new interpretation. One who presents the new interpretation has to prove it. And then another scholar can come and say, no, that interpretation is wrong. So if you can prove that interpretation is wrong, that's also is new knowledge. You understand? So the coming up with the new interpretation is a new knowledge. If you can prove that that interpretation is wrong, that also is new knowledge. So, it's something you have to do on your own. But when you write, if you say that, okay, Buddha says this, Visuddhimagga says this, Jnanavira says this, is that all? Then that is not a research. Very easy. You can look at the sutta, okay, this is what Buddha says about Paticcasamuppada. Then you go to commentary, you say this is what Buddha Ghosha says. And then also you read Venerable Jnanavira's book and you say this is what Jnanavira says. But what are you saying about it? If you don't have anything to say about it, then you are not a researcher. You are just reporting, describing. I forgot to write reporting. Write that word also to that list. Describing, listing, reporting. All those are not research. You are just reporting what other people said. But if you can prove your own something, either you can support somebody's view or you can disprove somebody's view. That's fine. In academic world, there are no friends or enemies, We look at people's ideas, people's works, not people. So if I criticize your writing, I am not criticizing you. Okay? Two different things. I am not criticizing you, but I am criticizing your writing, your weave. So it's like that. Is that clear? Okay. I think time is kind of passing for you, so thank you very much for listening very attentively. And then I will see you tomorrow and we will have a similar discussion on Katavattu. So thank you very much.